If I could ask everyone in the audience to have a seat, settle down, ask our board members to kindly take your seats. As a reminder, we video and audio record our meetings. So if you have something to say on the record, please push the little button on your microphone and speak your mind, and then push the button when you're done so we don't have multiple people. Because we have 5 active mics at a time. That's our max. So let's keep that in mind. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Director Fuentes to start our meeting.
Good morning. I'd like to call the Planning and Administrative Committee to order. Secretary, please call roll.
Director Durante?
Here.
Director Fraga?
Here.
Director Higgins?
Here.
Director Hobson?
Here.
By phone with paperwork completed. Director Payne? Director Ross?
Here.
Director Fuentes?
Here.
We have a quorum of 6 present with 1 absent. If the record would also show that Directors Anderson, Buchanan, Colson, DeWitt, Lewis, McGallis, Melvin, Troiani, and Chairman Dillard are all also present.
Thank you. I'd first like to start with our newest board and committee member, Ryan Higgins. Welcome. Next is the approval of the minutes from the meeting held on March 17th. Wow, it's been a while. Are there any questions or comments?
So moved.
Moved by Director Rainey, second by Director Fraga. There's a motion and second for approval of the minutes submitted. Secretary, please call roll.
Director Durante?
Aye.
Director Fraga?
Aye.
Director Higgins?
Aye.
Director Hobson?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Aye.
Director Fuentes?
Aye.
6 ayes and 1 absent.
Thank you. Next is a presentation of the 2016 Strategic Plan Progress Report. Jessica.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Director Fuentes and members of Planning Administration Committee. My name is Jessica Hector Sue, and I'm the Director of Planning and Market Development here at the RTA. And today I'll be giving you an informational update about the Regional Transit Strategic Plan. The plan that we have was passed by you in 2013, and it spans the years 2013 to 2018. It provides a vision for a world-class regional public transportation system, providing a foundation to the region's prosperity, livability, and vitality. And it has 4 goals, you'll recall. The first goal is to provide a valuable, reliable, accessible, and attractive transportation options. And this goal really looks at the services that we provide. The second goal is to ensure financial viability. And this looks at the work that we do as agencies to be good stewards of the funding that we receive. The third goal is to promote a green, livable, and prosperous region. And this goal looks at the effect that we have on the region and the region has on us. And then the fourth goal is to continue to be an advocate for and a trusted steward of transportation, and public transit in particular. This looks at the work that we do to educate decision makers, educate the public about the importance of public transit. So the report that you received in your packet and you have before you today is the third in an annual progress report that I've brought to you to tell you about how we're doing against the plan. What we do in the report and what I'm going to do today is we look at one quantitative measure for each of the goals and look at how that's tracking over 10 years and where we see things going. And then we look at a qualitative measure as well, some actions that we've taken, both us and the service boards, to push forward each of these goals. It's really a high-level document. We can look to a lot of the other work that we do to get more detail, some more that you'll hear right after this on the regional report cards, the work that B does every month giving you ridership updates. Those are much more detailed. This is really the system as a whole. Looking at the first goal, to provide the valuable, reliable, accessible, and attractive transportation options, we look at the transit trips per resident. And what this is a measure of the average number of trips people are taking. We're around 66, which if you pause for a minute and think about it, is quite a lot. So 66 transit trips per resident on average. Think about the people who commute every day, the people who you know who don't commute at all or don't take the train at all. 66 on average is 4th in the nation, and it's been trending ever so slowly up for about 10 years, which is a good thing. We want to see that trend continue to increase. However, since 2012, it has been going down. And what was a tactical observation in the beginning is starting to become a strategic observation as it lasts for a couple of years. We know that this is due to bus ridership declines. Rail ridership, CTA rail ridership is very high, but bus ridership is going down. The service boards are aware of this. They are both trying to understand it and also to do something about it. So one of the things that they've been doing to try and turn around this trend is restructuring some of their services. For example, CTA last year added service on a couple of their express routes, and they also have been doing some work on their south side bus services. PACE invested about $7.6 million in additional service in some suburban areas out in Aurora, West Cook, DuPage County. And Metra added service on the Rock Island during the weekends and middays. They actually used our own innovation, coordination, and enhancement, our ICE funds, to do that. And that's been a really successful pilot, so they've decided to roll that into their regular operations, and they plan to continue to add service on that corridor going forward. So PACE and Metra have already seen some ridership improvements from these changes, and they hope that, again, it will continue to turn the tide against this bus ridership decline. All three agencies have also been doing some things that kind of help improve the transit experience because they know that riders' expectations are changing. So Metra, for example, as you know, piloted Wi-Fi on some of their trains, and that was successful, so they're adding that on more of their fleet this year. The Ventra app was also a big achievement that came out late last year, and I, as a Metra rider, use it every day. I see people on my train using it. That has really been something that's been successful in helping people use transit more easily than they otherwise would have. Moving on to the second goal, ensuring financial viability. For this, we look at the cost per passenger mile, which is a good gauge for our costs. And we are around 59 cents per passenger mile, which is the lowest, remains the lowest of all of our peers. And revenues cover that. As you know, we are required by law to have a balanced budget, but as I like to say, budgets don't balance themselves. It takes a lot of work on the part of staff to maintain the costs. It takes a lot of work on the part of leadership to make sure that we have the right revenue to cover those things. The state budget did affect us this year. As you have heard throughout the year, most of our operations funding continued through continuing appropriations. However, state funding for ADA paratransit that we have to provide by federal law was cut by 55%. The state reduced fare reimbursement program was funded at about half of the levels that we had budgeted. Several projects suffered administrative delays, especially in the planning realm where we work. And some of the capital projects that were capital construction projects that were state bond funded were put on hold by the service boards in an abundance of caution. So we were affected. RTA, as you've heard throughout the year, helped with that. We continued to leverage our excellent bond rating, or our excellent credit rating rather, to do short-term borrowing to cover kind of cash flow anomalies and to continue to support the bonding program that we use to pay for part of the service board's capital programs. Looking a little bit more at capital programs, this was something that was the hardest, their biggest challenge in the area of financial viability for the service boards this year. It came out again and again as we were going through preparing this document, and some of the projects that were affected are shown here that are either delayed or modified. And we are partners with the state, of course, and we are continuing to talk with them to move these projects forward and to identify the priorities that will be funded as cash does become available, but we'd be remiss not to mention it in a discussion about financial viability. Looking beyond the state to the federal level, the service boards were very aggressive about getting federal funding. So CTA applied for $1 billion in FTA core capacity funding for construction on the Red Purple modernization project that they were already working on designing. Metro did some creative things. They were able to get a Tiger grant and combine funding with Canadian Pacific to replace the Fox River Bridge this year, which was also a nod to their work in that area. Looking to next year and the things that they're doing to improve their stewardship work, PACE will be controlling their ADA paratransit costs through some contractual work that they're doing and new contracts that they're adding next year. Metra will be applying for positive train control grants. They already are right now, and hopefully that we will get some positive news out of that. Also considering fare increases, as we've heard about. CTA will be upgrading its financial management system and adding some service planning software next year. Moving now to the third goal, to promote a green, livable, and prosperous region. For this goal, we look at mode share. And what this is the percentage of people taking transit, usually not driving. For this, we're around 12%, really close to Boston and DC, again, fourth in the nation on this. We see this trending upward over time. So although ridership overall has gone down, Our market share, if you will, has not. That continues to trend ever so slowly upward, and even in the last couple of years has increased ever so slightly. So we hope to continue to see this improving. And one of the, I guess, most interesting things we've been able to observe over last year in this goal area is some of the planning work that we've been doing over the last couple of decades come to fruition. So, RTA has been investing in the community planning program and transit-oriented development for a while. And, during the early 2000s, we saw a little bit of work. During the recession, clearly we didn't see any development. But now that the economy is picking up, we're starting to see things built in the areas where we've done plans. So Orland Park is one example of that. We did a plan with them in 2000. There were a couple of developments that happened sort of in the mid-2000s, but then all of a sudden, last year, townhomes being built. This year, Mariano's being built. Next year, an office building being built. And these are great examples of communities taking the footprints that we help them develop, or the blueprints, rather, we help them develop through the TOD program, and bringing those into reality. The service boards also have done some work to green the transit system itself this year. PACE received some CNG buses. CTA received funding from the No Low Emissions program from FTA, and we'll be implementing some electric buses next year. So they're doing work as well to green the transit system. Looking on now to the fourth goal, to be advocates for and trusted stewards of public transportation. In this goal area, we look at capital funding. And this is because a lot of our advocacy efforts go into capital funding. Capital funding is still insufficient. We project in our current capital program that we'll have about $3.9 billion of capital funding over the next 5 years. That's about half of what we need to maintain the state of good repair backlog the way it is today. And that's about a quarter of what we need to actually address that backlog over 20 years. So the funding just isn't there. We were glad, however, to see some of our advocacy efforts, again, come to fruition in DC when the FAST Act was passed. That was something that we were all able to celebrate late last year. And this year, it yielded about $61 billion for public transportation across the nation. It added additional funds to things like the State of Good Repair program that FDA has. And we estimate that we'll add about $250 million to our own formula funding here in northeastern Illinois for transit. So that was really good news. One of the most common questions I get when I'm outside of transit circles, when I, cocktail talk, or when I'm at a block party is, why should the federal government invest in transit? Why should the state invest in transit? Why does it matter to all of these levels of government? And so I think it is important to pause and think about that from a strategic perspective. At the federal level, transit really does help decrease the environmental impact and the air quality issues in our major urban areas, which is a federal priority. It also removes cars off the interstate highway system, which was developed by the federal government to speed commerce, speed defense movement across the country. So it helps take cars off of that. At the state level, having a really vibrant transit system in northeastern Illinois helps attract jobs to Illinois. It helps, again, take cars off those roads that we need for interstate commerce here. And then at the local level, it's very practically useful to people. It helps with mobility. It helps get people to jobs whether or not they own a car because they can't afford one or they choose not to have one. And so it's really important that we have partners at all of these levels making an investment in transit. And we at RTA this year have been working to get that message out through the blog. I hope you're all signed up for it. The new blog that we have, through the marketing efforts that we have both for consumer marketing as well as business marketing, and for very practical things like letting people know about our transit benefit program, which makes it cheaper for people to ride. So that concludes what I wanted to tell you about our progress against this strategic plan, and to let you know that going forward, we are looking to adopt a new strategic plan in 2018. So we began our work preparing for that this year. We've been doing some research and at the staff level thinking about what next year will hold. We've been coordinating with CMAP, who's updating their long-range transportation plan and for the region at the same time, and looking to see how we can coordinate with them. We'll be back to talk with you in the coming months about that. I look forward to those conversations. And before I finish, I want to thank Will Gillespie and Peter Fehrenwald for their work on this document, for Karen for her work as well. You'll hear from her, and she helped with this, and Communications and others who also contributed to the document. And with that, thank you for your time, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. I thought the report was well done. So any questions, comments? Anyone?
Mr. Chairman. Is there a working theory about why bus ridership across the whole area is going down? Because it just doesn't seem like it's not just the city, it's not just the county, it's just,
I mean, part of it is definitely gas prices. So gas prices are still very low, and we do see that there is a relationship between those two. When gas prices are high, transit ridership tends to go up, and when gas prices are low, it tends to go down. So we think that that's definitely part of it. Beyond that, we don't know. I think that's why the service boards are trying to look into it. They're both really intent upon understanding that better. So CTA is doing a lot of work to try and understand, is it the speeds of the buses? What is it? Is it TNCs? What is it? And I don't think they know right now, but I think the main thing is probably gas prices.
Director Durante?
Is it possible for us to be able to get some figures on where the ridership is coming from, either by county or north, central, south, RTA region? Where's our best area? Where's our worst area? Is that possible?
Yeah, sure. It is. We can get back to you with that information. Yeah, I mean, most of the ridership is on the CTA in the region, and then we have the metro lines. We know their ridership by route as well, and then for PACE, we can also get you information about where the ridership is coming from.
Yeah, because following up on Director Melvin's question, you would think with the new equipment that we've purchased, the amount of services we're providing, the access to the availability now of transportation and helping people, providing them with the information on how to ride, all of the things that we've done over the years, ridership dropping. Is it gas prices? It's gas prices? Is that what it is?
I mean,
Leanne?
we've done, and not just us, this is a national phenomenon. That seems to be the strongest correlation between gas prices and bus ridership. Rail ridership is continuing to be pretty strong, and actually in some cases growing. But there are all these, it's hard to do a scientific analysis, right? Because you've got a lot of things changing right now. You've got, all the transportation network companies, the Ubers, the Lyfts playing in the marketplace. So like Jessica said, the service boards are doing a lot of analysis right now to really try to, and we're working with national partners too to try to understand what that means. To your question specifically about ridership, we will be issuing the annual ridership report pretty soon, hopefully next few weeks, next month. Which gives you a look at that. Unfortunately, that's almost a year in arrears because we wait till we get scrub data from the National Transit Database so we can really do sort of apples-to-apples comparisons. But, on the RTA website and the RTAMS website, you can actually go and look and break down on ridership by route even if you wanted to. But we'll, I know you don't probably want to drill down to that level, but we'll provide that ridership report, and it gives you a good overview of kind of how things are trending.
Any other questions? Director Lewis?
Leanne, do we actually survey customers or ask them for information about their preferences, et cetera, et cetera? Is that built into the process?
Oh, okay.
Actually, the next presentation, Karen Allen is leading that survey, so she can talk about that.
Okay. Thank you, Jessica. Perfect segue for the next item. Presentation of the 2015 Regional Performance Report. Karen, thank you.
Morning.
Morning.
My name's Karen Allen. I'm the Principal Analyst for the Division of Capital Programming and Performance Analysis. I'm here to present the results. Oh, where's my presentation? I'm here to present results from the 2015 Regional Report Card and the 2015 Sub-Regional Report. They both look at 5-year data trends for CTA, Metro, and PACE. The Regional Report Card takes data from each service board and aggregates that data so we can evaluate performance on a region-wide basis. The Sub-Regional Report looks at each service board and mode individually. The reports are required by the RTA Act and include a set of measures the RTA Board has adopted for monitoring performance. The set of measures was developed collaboratively with service boards through a performance measurement task force that consists of representatives from each service board and the RTA. We continue to work with this group throughout the year to develop and analyze the data for each annual report. The reports presented today are for the most recently completed calendar year 2015. The reports are based on data submitted by each of the service boards to the National Transit Database, or NTD. Using the NTD provides consistency and definitions among the service boards, plus the NTD goes through an audit process to ensure clean data. So the service boards submit their data annually in April. The NTD goes through their audit process throughout the summer. That happened in the summer 2016, and the data was finalized in August. And by the way, this is the same database we use when we do our peer performance measure reports, so we get consistency within our region as well as with our peers throughout the country. Both reports evaluate performance for 5 service areas. Coverage monitors how much service is made available to the people in our region. Oops. Here. I don't know what that means.
There we go. All right.
Okay. So coverage looks at how much service we provide to the people in the region, how much actually gets used. In the service efficiency and effectiveness area, we look at how much is spent on supplying that service in relation to how much service is provided and consumed. Delivery reflects the quality of the service provided. Maintenance and capital investment indicates the allocation of capital funds in the replacement and maintenance of our infrastructure. And solvency assesses the financial condition to ensure there are sufficient resources to meet current and ongoing budgetary needs. As I go through the presentation, I'll review the regional and sub-regional results in these 5 areas. 2015 was a challenging year for the service boards. The year began again with some pretty severe winter weather events. We saw gas prices stay low throughout the year, and that affected people's decisions to use transit. More service was offered in 2015 in terms of vehicle miles and in terms of vehicle hours, with these indicators also more favorable over the 5-year review period. Ridership declined for the 3rd consecutive year. However, the rate wasn't as steep as it was in 2013 and 2014. The region's capital needs continued to be unmet. The most recent capital needs assessment reported $36.1 billion in capital needs, with $19.5 billion of that being for already overdue projects known as backlog. Despite these challenges, the fare revenues improved for each service board in 2015, although Metra was the only operator to implement a fare increase in the year. Next, I'll go through the regional results for each of those 5 service areas, starting with service coverage. And then I'll provide a highlight of the sub-regional performance from one of the service boards. Here we can see a snapshot of regional performance for the service coverage measures. This chart shows the nominal value for each measure, as well as arrows, which reflect 1- and 5-year performance trends. The direction of each arrow refers to the change in value between the 2 points in time. The color of the arrow indicates whether this change was favorable or unfavorable. So what we would want to see are a lot of green arrows, and we do get a few of these in the coverage area. The first 2 measures reflect the amount of service made available to our public. These were improved for 2015 as well as for the 5-year trend. We did start the analysis period with a low base because of significant service cuts in 2010 and 11 that followed the financial crisis. But since then, as we can see, there's been some growth back in service levels as the service boards aim to attract new riders. The bottom 4 measures all include ridership as a component and therefore showed declines in performance in 2015 as ridership decreased slightly by 0.3%, which is fewer than 2 million trips. Over the 5-year period, ridership was down 2.4%. The average trip length, though, however, increased 2.9% over the past 5 years. So riders are taking fewer trips, but those trips are actually longer. This had a positive impact on passenger miles traveled, which is that green arrow on the last line of the chart. And we came up with a system of arrows and colors a few years ago, and the goal was to present the data in a simple form, which could be easily interpreted. However, the arrows don't really reflect the magnitude of that change. So although 4 of those arrows for 2015 are red, they represent unfavorable changes that amount to less than 1%. So the results aren't as negative as they might seem with a quick glance. Let's take a closer look at service coverage. On a regional basis, the RTA system provided about 626 million trips in 2015, which was, again, slightly lower compared to 2014. Although this was the 3rd-year ridership decline, the rate of decrease for 2015 was the least. So let's look at the chart on the left first. The leftmost bar is a stacked bar chart that shows each mode's share of 2015 ridership. CTA Bus carried 44% of the trips, CTA Rail was at 39%, Metro 12%, Pace Suburban was at 5%, and ADA Paratransit was 1%. If we were looking at ridership at a service board level, I could tell you those percentages have not changed in the last 10 years by more than 1 percentage point. The chart next to that one shows the passenger miles traveled for each of those modes. 2015 was the 5th consecutive year where passenger miles traveled exceeded 4 billion. Of those 4 billion miles, Metro riders traveled the most at 40%. 36% were on CTA Rail, 16% were on CTA Bus, Pace Suburban was at 6%, and ADA Paratransit was again at 1%. Now, if we dive a little bit deeper, we can see an interesting trend happening at CTA, which Jessica referred to in her presentation. There's been a significant shift in how the passengers are using CTA's system, and you can see that whether you look at passenger trips or passenger miles. This chart on the right is another stacked bar chart reflecting passenger miles traveled for all the trips taken on just CTA. The passenger miles traveled on the bus, shown in dark blue, has decreased from 39% in 2006 to 31% in 2015, while rail passenger miles, shown in light blue, has increased from 60 to 69% of CTA's total. Now, this upward trend in rail ridership has also been seen in other major transit systems. For example, New York City Transit has seen a rail mode share increase from 67 to 77% in that same time period. Here we can take a look at service efficiency and effectiveness, which is the ratio of operating expense to indicators that show supply and demand, or supply and consumption throughout the region. We've got a lot of red arrows. The top two measures reflect the amount of service provided, which was up in 2015 and compared to 2011. After adjusting for inflation, we can see 2015 was a tough year, with cost per unit of transit capacity staying level and the cost per vehicle revenue mile up 1.7% compared to 2014. Over the 5-year time period, both of those measures were higher than 2011, even after adjusting for inflation. The bottom two measures are affected by ridership, which was down slightly in 2015 and compared to 2011. Here, the red arrows show the effect of higher operating costs spread over roughly the same or fewer passenger trips and miles, with the result being the unfavorable red arrows for the 1 and 5-year performance trends. Let's take a closer look at service efficiency. A couple slides ago, I told you ADA trips comprise about 1% of all the region's ridership. Yet here we see the cost of providing those trips takes up about 6% of the region's annual operating cost. So providing cost-efficient service is imperative to control those costs, particularly as the number of paratransit trips has increased each year and is just over 4 million for 2015. That's almost double compared to what Pace took over when they took over the service in 2007. So the amount of trips has more than doubled. The chart on the right shows a continued downward trend for Pace ADA paratransit operating costs per vehicle mile. Now, intuitively, we might think that line would be fairly flat. ADA is not fixed route service. It's dependent on ridership demands, and that drives the cost of operating the service. However, we can see the cost per mile has actually trended downward. It was more than 6% lower in 2015 compared to 2011. That reflects cost-efficient provision of service. The next area is service delivery. On-time performance was mixed in 2015. We saw declines in performance for CTA and Pace Bus, as well as for ADA Paratransit, while CTA Rail and Metro saw improvements for the year. Overall, the RTA system-wide on-time performance was at 85.1%, which is 1 percentage point lower than 2014 and 1.9 percentage points lower than 2011. The regional on-time performance result was heavily influenced by CTA Bus, which experienced a 3 percentage point drop due to several reasons. They cited increased traffic congestion on city streets, some major construction projects, including the Loop Link, which caused months-long delays and service disruptions, and more reliable performance data coming from newer buses and upgraded systems they put into place. The number of reportable incidents grew by 80 in 2015. Spread over fewer trips, the reportable incident rate increased to 0.099 incidents per passenger trips, or about 1 in a million. Let's take a closer look at Metro's on-time performance. Metro's on-time performance has stayed very high over the years. At the lowest point in 2011, Their on-time performance was 93.6%, and it was lower because that's the year Metro adopted more stringent rules for determining on-time performance. So there was a dip that year, but they rebounded and have kept their OTP closer to their target of 95%. Of course, 2014 was the polar vortex year, so we saw a dip then, but Metro more than rebounded from that in 2015 and had their best on-time performance year of the 5 years under review. And actually, in 2015, Metro started a string of on-time performance target achievements that continues through this year. I think they're now at 19 months in a row where they've hit that target of 95%. Now we'll take a look at maintenance and capital investment. As you can see, this area presented some challenges as well. On the top line for the capital program, we have a green arrow, but this indicates an increase in the programming from the state Jumpstart Bond program, which was never fully realized. The 10-year capital funding need is shown on the second line and was unchanged from 2014, as we're awaiting the release of the latest capital asset condition assessment report, which will be released in the next month or so. At the time of the last condition report, released in 2014, the 10-year funding needs totaled $36.1 billion. That's the amount needed to achieve and maintain a state of good repair for the region's infrastructure. About $20 billion of that is comprised of already past due projects, known as the backlog. Our capital program does not meet that need, with the result being assets stay in use longer and may cost more to maintain. The next line reflects the region's most visible assets, the vehicles our customers ride every day. 28.2% of those vehicles are in service beyond their minimum useful life, as defined by the Federal Transit Administration. That number is higher compared to 2014 and compared to 2011. Despite the older vehicles that we have in service, the miles between major mechanical failure rate improved by 33% in 2015, which we expected following the polar vortex events of 2014. I did want to point out, though, that the performance achieved in 2015 was more than rebounded from 14 and was the highest of the 5-year period under review. So here we can take a closer look at the capital investment area. The chart on the left's blue bars show the capital program for each of the past 5 years. The capital program includes anticipated funding from federal, state, and local sources, an average $1.5 billion annually. It's important to note here again that the Jumpstart program, as one example, this reflects anticipated funding that may or may not get actually seen. That dashed orange line represents what was actually expended on capital projects each year. That amount averaged about $744 million annually. That red dashed line up on the top is what would be needed annually to achieve a state of good repair, which includes addressing backlog and ongoing maintenance needs over a 20-year time period. In 2014, this figure was projected to be $2.6 billion per year going forward. So clearly, there's a significant gap between the anticipated funding, what actually gets expended, and what is needed across the system. That red line will only get higher as more projects are deferred due to a lack of funding. The chart on the right is something new we've added to this year's sub-regional report, and it's another way to visualize the state of the capital need. The blue bars here reflect the number of the region's vehicles that are beyond their minimum useful life, that 28% that we talked about in the other slide. In 2015, that number totaled 2,100 of the region's fleet of about 7,600 vehicles. In contrast, in 2015, the region as a whole put 581 new vehicles into service, about 27% of what was needed. Final snapshot slide shows the regional solvency. The average cost to provide one passenger trip in 2015 was $3.93. Of that cost, $1.56 was recovered through passenger fares, which was 5 cents higher than 2014, with the largest increase at Metra, which implemented fare increase in February. Over the 5-year time period, the fare revenue per passenger trip has increased 23.2%, even though ridership was actually 2.4% lower. This was due to fare increases, the move to the Ventra system, the discontinuance of free transfers for cash customers at CTA and PACE, and customer preferences toward a pay-as-you-go fare system versus other discounted types of passes. The fare revenue shortfall is the difference between the operating cost and the fare revenue. This has increased 10.8% compared to 2011. So even though the fares have increased, they have not increased at the same rate as the operating costs, which increases the shortfall that must be made up other ways, either through system-generated revenue or through the use of subsidies. The final measure on this slide shows capital expenditures of $779 million in 2015. This was less than 30% of the projected annual need to get the RTA Systems assets into a state of good repair within 20 years. Here are some solvency highlights. The chart on the left shows operations funding sources for the RTA region. The bright orange slice at the top of the bar shows the amount of directly generated revenue other than fares that comes from parking fees, concessions, and advertising. That number is constituted about 4% of the total operations funding for each of the 5 years under review. The middle orange section shows a proportion of fare revenue that covers operating cost. That's what the FTA calls a recovery ratio and only reflects fare box revenue. That number increased to 39.8% in 2015. The blue section at the bottom shows the subsidy portion. That's the amount covered by local, state, and federal contributions to cover operating costs. The chart on the right shows what's been happening with Pace bus fare revenue over the past 5 years. With its second year of ridership decline in 2015, Pace ended the 5-year time period with a ridership decline of 1.7%. However, its fare revenue has increased by over 14% during that time. This has happened in the absence of a fare increase and comes from several factors. One was related to an improved revenue sharing agreement with CTA for passengers that transfer between the two services. This was based on more accurate ridership data now available through the Venture system. Secondly, Pace saw an increase in the use of pay-as-you-go fares with Ventra rather than discounted passes, which contributed to the higher average fare and can be seen in the chart. And finally, Pace eliminated the reduced price transfers for cash-paying customers in July 2014, which increased fares for that segment of riders. So coming up next month, we'll be presenting the year-to-date performance measures through the third quarter. Those are part of the quarterly financial report and include some pure ridership data that's made available through the NTD on a monthly basis. We're currently in the process of implementing the third regional customer satisfaction survey. This process was started last October, and with the cooperation of each service board, we've developed a survey instrument and methodology to conduct the surveys. Online surveys are about to be distributed to riders at each service board within the next 10 days, and we will shore up those results with onboard surveying efforts where needed at CTA and Pace in November. We'll be reporting on those findings in the spring of 2017. Also, looking ahead to 2017, I'll be working on the peer performance reports as soon as the FTA publishes the data. This can happen anytime between today and mid-January, and I expect to present those results in March. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions.
Thank you. Any questions, comments?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Okay.
On page 6 of the presentation, where you talk about the relationship between bus and rail ridership, or percentage in terms of total miles, have the total miles remained flat, or have they gone up or gone down?
The passenger miles traveled at CTA has actually gone up. So it's pretty nominal, 1.2% over 5 years, total miles.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is on page 10 relating to Metra's on time. The on-time performance is rated against, if I understand correctly, rated against rail standards of plus or minus 6 minutes is considered on time. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, do we have any ideas what our riders, our customers, think is actually on time?
That's a tricky question.
I mean, because if your train is late by 10 minutes, boy, you really think that, or even if it's late by 6 minutes, although Metra would consider it on time, you as a rider consider it late.
In the way Metra counts on-time performance, it's for the final terminal stop of that train. So I guess theoretically it could be late at every stop in between. As long as it gets to that last destination within 6 minutes, it's on time.
I'm just concerned here that there's a disconnect between what Metra considers, and I understand that they're following rail standards.
That's the rail standard, right.
But what they consider is on time versus what our riders consider is on time. Is there any way that we could reconcile that?
I would not know how. On-time performance is definitely a question asked in the,
When we survey our
I
riders,
was just
Blake,
gonna say-
this is Kirk Dillard. When we survey our riders, at least Metro riders, can't we ask them, what do you think
Oh, we
is
do.
an acceptable time period to have your train delayed? To get to Director Hobb, and Blake, it's a great question. I had a law partner call me and say, I'm late to my anniversary dinner with my wife. So I texted him back the other day and I said, how many minutes is your train late? And he said, it's 20 minutes late. This is rush hour. So I instantly said, hang on. And I went and saw travel times. And the Eisenhower out to where he was going was an hour and 10 minutes. And I said, it's supposed to be 16 minutes to Wolf Road, but it's over an hour. So, we're 3 times better than the Eisenhower. But I think you can get at it. I would like to know, too, what average riders think is late. I mean, to me, late is 20 minutes or more, maybe. But that's a great, we ought to try to survey that.
In the satisfaction survey coming out, we do ask about whether they're satisfied with on-time performance, but we don't get to minutes and what would be deemed acceptable.
And breakdowns and cancellations are really what, that's what I think is important. How much, what are our mechanical needs and are our trains canceled? Those are the more, as long as we're within, the 10-minute period or so, to me, that's pretty good considering what we have to, deal with. The fact that we don't own our railroads. The other thing is, for those of you who, Director Frieg and I take the Burlington Northern, the BNSF is making some changes in their schedules, like an airline would, to more accurately reflect when they know there's generally freight train delays. They're making changes in their schedule. So they're adding a few minutes to some rides, just based upon the last 4 or 5 years BNSF traffic, mostly freight, in fact, all freight. But they're going to make some schedule changes. That's our largest riding line in terms of numbers. So that'll help these on-time performances. And generally it only may be a 3 or a 4 minute change in the length of the ride, and as long as riders know that, they can plan accordingly. But we ought to see, as Director Hobson said, what do our riders really think, or Metra? Talk to Mr. Orsino, find out what they really think is acceptable. But sometimes reality and what they believe ought to be are 2 different things. But just going back to that anecdotal, I'm 20 minutes late. When I tell them, yeah, and if you drove, it would be 2 hours versus a half an hour type of comparison.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your comments. That does highlight or illustrate my point. When I talk to people anecdotally up in McHenry County, and I express that, hey, Metra's 96% on time, and they give me this look like they don't believe it, and they think, frankly, that data is not worth the paper that it's printed on. They obviously have some sort of different perception versus what the rail industry standard is, and I would like to get to the bottom of what that difference is.
And I bet you, Director Hobson, if you ask them how many incidents there are per passenger, they'd never believe that it's less than 1%, 1% per million. Part of it is just the enormity of the scale of 2 million riders a day, and everything is personal to them. But I'm absolutely convinced that about 97% of Metra's trains are within that 6-minute window.
And Mr. Chairman, why are we limiting that review to just Metra?
Good question. I only did it, Anthony, because Blake's out in McHenry County and Metra and Pacer, but that's a great.
My only point is,
I agree.
I think Blake's made a really great comment here, and I think it does. to me, should make us think about the entire system. I mean, personally, when I think about 6 minutes, 6 minutes late. You know, to me, anything more than 1 or 2 is late, right? But it seems like we ought to be thinking about this for the entire system.
I agree. And staff figure out how, Metra is probably the easiest to survey. But with technology, the CTA is getting easier to survey. I always tell people a 1 or 2 minute delay could be one light change at the intersection of Wabash and Jackson, right outside of our, or Wells and Jackson, right outside of our office.
There's always 1,000 reasons why. I think a typical rider really doesn't care. It's a matter of, is it there or isn't it?
The other thing is, I read a New Yorker magazine piece on the New York system, and I was just overwhelmed at the number of delays and the systematic delays in New York City. I mean, they are off the chart, I would love to know what some of our peers think of delays and what their delays are. New York is off the charts. In fact, I called President Carter of the CTA and said, "Are these numbers in this magazine piece right about New York? I mean, where you're talking a third or 40% of their trains delayed on a regular basis." And he said yes. And he tried to stick up for the New York system, saying that they had more riders, they're more congested than we are. And when you have that many riders, you have more incidents, whether it's somebody that's sick on a train, the kinds of things that you have. But let's dig down deeper. And Blake, I appreciate you, Director Hobson, saying we got to find out what our riders think is acceptable.
Director DeWitt? Okay, Director Lewis?
So, Jill, was this the survey work that you were referring to before?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess I would also ask that if we're having a decrease in demand, if we ask the customer and give them the voice of the customer, what are the issues that are preventing you from considering, and I think we were talking about bus ridership before, why don't you take the bus more? If that could be incorporated, or maybe it already is, but that was the question I was asking earlier.
That is part of the survey question. So we would ask riders, are you riding more, I'm trying to think how it's worded. Has your use of the bus increased or decreased over a certain period of time? And then we do ask them, it's gone down, why? So what reasons contribute to that?
Could we ask them what would make you ride the bus more? What are the things that are preventing you to maybe kind of proactively try and solicit some more demand? So that might be a way to get at that issue.
Okay.
Thanks, Director Lewis. I'll also say that we are kind of doing a deeper dive on CTA's request into the bus issues, so we'll be asking those questions as a result of that too.
Director Ross?
So when we gather the information on the rider's perception, what is it we expect to happen? Because there's a solution, there's always two solutions to every problem. One is you either improve performance or you lower expectation. And so the question is, are they in a marketing effort creating an expectation that can't be met? And if so, maybe that's what they should correct. Personally, I think that's what the airlines do, when they tell you 3 hours for a flight and airtime is 2 hours and 15 minutes. I mean, so is it a question again of improving performance or changing expectations?
Okay, any other?
I don't want to be in the position of telling the service boards what to do, but our role here is to find out what the customer's experience was, how satisfied they are, and give that information to the service boards and let them figure out through policy or other decisions how to deal with that information. So they do address all the items that come up in the customer satisfaction surveys. They do address those with their budget plan for the next year, and we'll be hearing more about that after we get some results. But that would be for the service boards to decide.
Any other?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
To
Director
develop Director Lewis's concern about why CTA is shedding passengers, we could ask potentially even a more targeted question. If you were not riding CTA today, what other modality would you be selecting? Divvy? Is it Lyft or Uber? listing out some specific options.
That is included in the survey as well.
Terrific.
Yeah, we want to get a handle on what Divvy is doing to the ridership, particularly for bus.
You know what may be helpful if you could give us one of the surveys or ahead of time, a prototype of some sort, so maybe we could look at it and critique it maybe a little just to see what
Can do that.
another set of eyes could find out. Director Buchanan?
I don't know where I heard of that. It was either on the news or on the radio. And they were ranking the cleanliness of the buses. And our system was at the very, very bottom end. Is there a solution on board here to clean, sanitize, continue to upgrade the insides of our buses so more people feel more comfortable riding the buses?
Good question.
Thank you.
I guess just a quick response on that. I think that's a big issue for PACE and the CTA. CTA had the courtesy campaign over the last year that kind of informed people, but I think it's not only it's just a passenger cleanliness and amenity that I think that we want to focus on.
Okay, Director Melvin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 16, miles between major mechanical failures. I just had a question. How do we think about this? If the backlog is increasing, I would think that this chart would be going down, right? Because you'd be, right? But something happened here. There's a 30% change in the numbers. So how do we think about that? Did something happen or?
Well, CTA just did their midlife overhauls of over 1,000 buses that got finished either in late 2015 or early 2016. That helps a lot. When those buses reach their midlife, they really start to break down more and become more unreliable. So that was a huge factor in getting that number up. But what happens, service boards are not going to not do the maintenance that's required. So even if the vehicles are getting older, they do what they can to keep them on the road and keep them reliable. So in the end, it ends up costing more money, but the reliability is something that they all strive for, and it's a major focus of their operations. So I'm glad to report that number doesn't go lower. It did go lower in 2014, but that was a lot of weather events that made that happen. So that number's pretty high.
Anything else? Okay, thank you. Next is an ordinance approving Section 5310, Enhancing Mobility for Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities Program of Projects, Kim.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the Planning Administration Committee. My name is Kim Porter, and I am the manager in our Grants Management Division. And today we're seeking your approval on a program of projects for the federally funded Enhanced Mobility of Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities Program, or Section 5310 for short. Its main goal is to expand mobility options. Before I talk about the projects, I want to give you just a little bit of background on the RTA's role and how we got to this point. The Section 5310 program is a federal formula grant program that provides assistance to public transportation projects that focus on enhancing mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities. The RTA has administered similar federal programs since 2006 and becoming the designated recipient of the Section 5310 program with IDOT in 2013. As a co-designated recipient of the Section 5310 program, RTA awards and administers Section 5310 eligible operating, short-term planning, and capital improvement projects. IDOT retains responsibility for awarding and administering grants for paratransit vehicles. The Coordinated Public Transit Human Service Transportation Plan, or HSTP for short, was first developed in 2007 by the RTA. The HSTP identifies strategies for improving mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities, as well as a process for project selection. With approval of the proposed ordinance, this Section 5310 program of projects will be incorporated into the federally required Coordinated Human Service Transportation Plan. The projects we are asking you to approve today continue to meet the goals of both the HSTP and Section 5310 program. In June, a call for federal fiscal year 15 continuation project funding was sent to our current subrecipients. The submitted applications, solicited from the pool of previously funded projects, were submitted for program eligibility by the RTA in conjunction with a project selection team composed of staff from IDOT, CMAP, and the RTA. As a result of that review, all 10 submitted continuation projects are recommended for approval and inclusion in the Section 5310 program of projects. No RTA funds are required to support any of these projects. Awards of $4.2 million in federal funds are proposed, with project sponsors committed to providing the $3 million local match, for a total of a $7.2 million program budget. The program of projects was released on September 15, 2016, for 30 days of public comment. Following approval of the continuation program of projects, RTA staff will develop a grant application for submission to the Federal Transit Administration so that the grantees may draw down funds for their respective project activities. Additionally, the RTA will solicit new applications for competitive selection of new projects in the spring of 2017. That concludes my remarks, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Director Lewis?
Chairman, I want to ask this question. The distribution of projects, is it contingent upon applicants applying for these funds? Because it seems like they're skewed, and there are not very many in Cook County or in the city. I know there's seniors with disabilities in those areas. So just curious as to the source and whether or not it's voluntary, or if we should be making this more well-known to our total community so we can get a better application pool.
It is based on applications received. Although we don't have many applicants that are receiving continuation funding, Little City Foundation does provide service within Cook County. But it is based on applicants. One requirement is that applicants will need to be able to fully fund this project up front and then be reimbursed their expenses.
Okay, so are you saying that there are not as many of these entities in, say, Cook or Chicago that would match up with some of the entities that have been funded in this particular array? I'm just trying to understand how that would work.
I'm not stating that. It's just based on applicants. Also, our project selection committee goes through all of the applications for certain criteria. So although in this particular call, this is continuation project funding, so entities that were provided funding previously, they applied and they're receiving funding again. And we will have a new call for projects in 2017 in which entities within the city of Chicago and throughout Cook County will be able to apply for funds then.
And do we market that? Do we let it be known in some way so that people who might have interest would be available for application?
Yes, we do. We mention the information at our board meeting, on our website, as well as via our communications team here.
Director Triani?
Just following up on that, how many total applicants were considered of the 10 that were finally selected?
10 were applied and all 10 were.
Oh, so nobody was denied under
No.
the continuation?
No denials.
Okay, thank you.
Director Clausen?
I'm just curious, what is the basis for our administering a grant in Kendall County? It's not in the RTA region. Is this because this is a federal program, or how do we go out to Kendall County?
That's a good question. It is because it's a federal program and they've applied for funding.
But our region, it's eligible through federal funding because it's part of the region considered the region in the federal level. So even though it's not our region, we're just administering the grant for them and we're required by federal law. So they are eligible for the program. Kendall County is part of CMAP's region, which is our broader MPO region. Therefore, they're eligible for these federal funds. we are the co-designated recipient for these funds, and if someone who is eligible applies for it, we are responsible for administering it, yes. Yeah.
Director DeWitt?
Just to clarify, there are no RTA funds as part of this appropriation. This is purely passed through federal dollars, thanks.
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, thank you. So, if there's no more questions, can I have a motion and second to approve the ordinance as submitted? Director Ross? Anybody? Director Pang, thank you. So I have a motion and second. Secretary, please call roll.
Director Durante?
Aye.
Director Frega? Director Higgins?
Aye.
Director Hobson?
Yes.
Director Pang?
Yes.
Director Ross? Director Fuentes?
Aye.
7 ayes and no absent.
Thank you. If there's no more further business to come before the public session of the Planning and Administrative Committee, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Director Frega, Director Durante, all those in favor? Aye. We stand adjourned.